Let's move on to another question. It's coming from Sarah, who's at Newham. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
My 10-year-old son and I have had to move in with my mum, my parents, to be able to afford the deposit just for rent in a house in Newham. I shouldn't have to do this as a professional. What are you going to do to make sure my son and I can have a secure and affordable home for the future?
David Lammy.
Well, my plan is to go to the bond markets and actually raise the money, because the problem is the government has withdrawn its public subsidy from building. It's largely left it to private developers. I don't think that is going to house your family. What you need is a mayor that comes up with an innovative plan to actually raise some money in the same way that we raise money for Transport for London. Go to the bond markets, you can raise 10 billion. With that 10 billion, I would spend half of it on social housing. I would spend the other half on a secondary market so that you can actually help with home ownership, but put the money back into a fund that goes to build. I would also come up with a London value tax that taxes those that buy off plan, that leave their homes empty, so that we can actually raise more money for Londoners to actually build. So it's only by having the cash, and no other candidate here has a plan for the money, and you heard the problems that Sadiq got into earlier, that we can actually get into the business of actually having homes for ordinary Londoners.
10 billion get us?
10 billion will get us 30,000 social homes, and it would create a secondary market. It depends where you build those homes. My plan is, I think that we should build on 3.6% of the green belt, not the areas that are green, but the car parks, the quarries, the wasteland in the green belt, because it's cheaper than some of the terrible stuff that we're seeing put up in inner London. Building towers, not homes that families can live in at all, but also building industry and business out of the city.
All right, Sadiq Khan, what's your plan?
Well, this question's personal to me. I was raised on a council estate. My dad was a bus driver. My mum so close to make ends meet. And housing is the number one crisis for our generation of London politicians. So I will take personal responsibility for housing. That means standing up to developers, saying if you want permission for homes in London, at least half need to be genuinely affordable, with a social rent of £120 a week or a London living rent. I will stop developers selling property off-plan overseas in Hong Kong, Singapore and Malaysia. I have nothing against foreigners. Some of my best friends and family are foreigners, but they shouldn't be buying property before we had a chance to do so and using them as gold bricks.
Would you adopt the Australian policy where they have a law where foreign people can't buy property in Australia unless they actually live in the properties? Now, I think a lot of people think that's a real problem now in London, that foreign investors are buying houses and flats and they're just staying empty.
Well, one of the things I do want to do is negotiate from the government powers for London to make laws for London. So for example, just recently, Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, stopped money laundering taking place in New York by saying if you're going to buy property in New York, you've got to be named. You can't hide behind a shell company. So the Australian example can't happen in London unless I have the power. So one of the things I would do is negotiate with the government for me to have those powers to make sure I could address some of London's problems. But the other point that your listener referred to was very important, is controlling the rental market. I think we should be controlling the rental market in London. In Berlin, they've got rent controls, which has led to last year rents going down by 3%. They've got it in New York. Two capitalist cities, Berlin and New York, in capitalist countries. I think the mayor should have powers over rent in London.
All right, Tessa Jowell.
Sarah, your circumstances are circumstances which, as I'm sure you know, you share with lots of your friends, other people of your age and people across London. This is the housing crisis that London faces. What has caused this housing crisis? It's the shortage of homes, shortage of social homes, shortage of affordable rent, homes available for rent, homes of decent quality, but also for young people, the impossibility and the growing impossibility of being able to buy. What would I do? I would, on day one, set up a crack world-class team in City Hall, not a quango, as some of the other candidates talk about, a crack delivery team whose job it would be to negotiate directly, not with developers, but directly with the contractors to start building homes, starting to build on the mayor's own land. Now, David's idea of bonds may be one way of of funding this, but there is plenty of prudential borrowing which is available against social housing as an asset in the city. And, I know that. So, Sarah, I will build the homes. I will... by building the homes, make it more likely that someone like you can find a flat
Diane
that they
Abbott.
can afford to live in.
Yeah, Sarah's situation is typical. And also, last year, I think record numbers of 30-year-olds moved out of London because they can't afford to buy. I would do a number of things. Frankly, I would fight Right to Buy for housing associations and local authorities. 1/3 of the council homes which were sold under Right to Buy now let to private landlords. Right to Buy sales are outstripping sales of new houses. I'd build directly. The mayor has the power to build directly.
How many?
I would have to first of all deal with the problems in relation to training and skills and materials, but I would certainly be able to build more than Boris. I would campaign for councils to be able to borrow to build. I think it's outrageous that Boris has sold off sites like New Scotland Yard entirely for luxury developments. I would insist on 50% social housing. I don't believe in building on the green belt like David's one thing we differ on. But I do know there are 11 tube stations and railway stations in the green belt, and I would build around them.
Okay, let's go back to our caller. Sarah, whose answer did you find most convincing there, Sarah?
To be honest, it's easy to say these things, but the reality is, when I went to my local council, the lady practically told me to move out of my local borough. So they can say they're building these homes, but how will they prioritise? Who will they give priority to? What criteria would they look at? Because the number of people that are waiting for homes will exceed supply by thousands and thousands. So who can guarantee that they will build enough homes for people like me?
Can I just come back on that?
So just one second. This is interesting because in the 1950s, under the Harold Macmillan government, he built 300,000 homes a year. Now, we're not suggesting that's possible in London. I don't know what proportion of those were in London, but isn't there a remarkable lack of ambition across the parties on this, David?
I totally agree with that. That's the point. We're moving to a 10 million city. This is not the time for quangos. This is not the time to speculate about prudential borrowing. It's the time to actually be able to at least say how much you would borrow to actually properly build. So that's why, quite rightly, people are being squeezed. There's chronic overcrowding, homelessness, and our party, as well as the Conservatives, went into the last election with policy that was too timid. That's why I've been bold on housing, started this in September, and made it the number one issue in this campaign.
Very, very quickly.
On this, Sarah, we need to have not just local authorities building more homes and housing associations, but the mayor as well. We need more homes built in London. There's no other way of addressing the housing crisis, but also we've got to fix the rental market. Almost half of Londoners now have private rental accommodation.
Before we move on to
fix that as well.
Tessa Jowell's Ask Me Anything, you can, of course, watch us live at lbc.co.uk. We're going right up until 8 o'clock. So let's start with Tessa Jowell's Ask Me Anything. David Lammy has the first question.
Tessa, 8,000 Londoners a year die from tobacco-related causes. Do you regret making Formula One exempt from the ban on tobacco advertising when you were a minister?
I introduced two things when I was a minister. Appointed as Minister for Public Health, wholly committed to tackling health inequality. So I was the first minister specifically charged with tackling health inequality. What's the big driver of health inequality? It is poverty. What is the big killer that more poor people die from? It is tobacco-related diseases, which is why I focused on everything that I could do to reduce the number of people dying from tobacco. The whole question about Formula One was, it was a pretty shabby time, quite honestly, in that, well, I was the minister. I'd been a minister for 6 months. I was a minister negotiating. I had no idea as the negotiator that there were these other interests at play, in that the Labour Party had received a donation from Bernie Ecclestone. And so my concern was to, as quickly as possible, to get legislation in place, which had to be Europe-wide legislation. I went all around Europe negotiating the tobacco directive and succeeded in getting it passed. And in time, Formula One was obviously brought into that.
Let's move on. Sadiq Khan.
There are lots of things when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, which he did, which we're very proud of. The minimum wage, Human Rights Act, sure start. Is there anything in your career as a minister during those 10 years that you did that you regret?
I mean, there are things that I regret not making more resilient in the face of an incoming coalition government. And it may be a small thing in global policy. It's a big thing in young people's lives. And that was that the school sport programme that I was with Estelle Morris set up so that sport would be part of every child's life, was wound up by the incoming coalition government at the stroke of a pen. And I often wonder what more I could have done to make that more resilient.
But you've seen in our town centres the proliferation of gambling shops, people incurring these huge debts. They can bet £100 a spin, and you were responsible for the relaxation of the gambling laws in our country. Do you not regret that?
Not the relaxation, Sadiq. The 2005 Gambling Act, which I took through Parliament, was necessary because gambling legislation was so antiquated and out of date, because I was so concerned about the proliferation of new forms of gambling.
Well, just on
just
this,
a sec, can I
I know Diane wants to ask a related question.
Can I just finish the point? That I work very closely with Salvation Army, the Methodists, the organisations that help people who suffer from gambling addiction. I put in place the means by which betting machines could be controlled, the number, speed of play, and everything else.
Right.
My regret is that the government hasn't acted
Diane
on that.
This.
Tessa, the 2005 Gambling Act, I'm quite familiar with it. I actually voted against it, and also I had to get involved in campaigning for years afterwards because of the proliferation of betting shops in places like Hackney. And there were two things about it which I think were particularly wrong. One was you changed the law. Used to say that in order to open another betting shop, you had to prove there was an unmet need. The 2005 Act, your Act, removed that provision in areas like Hackney and Tottenham. We have 7 or 8 betting shops. But the other thing is, why, Tessa, were you pushing for those super casinos? Actually, where people fought back and you weren't able to have as many as you wanted. But why were you pushing for super casinos?
Short answer, if you can, Tessa, please.
I mean, first of all, the Gambling Act, as I say, the tests that applied before did not offer protection from harm. The Gambling Act is based on public protection from harm, protection for children, and keeping gambling crime-free. We have now, as one of the international experts said to me some years ago, the most highly regulated gambling industry in the world. It is my regret. That the government did not use the means available to them, the incoming Tory government, to control machines in the hospital.
No. We're going to move on because we're running behind. Let's go to our next question, which is from Rani, who's in Slough. Hello, Rani.
Good evening.
Hi, what's your question?
I live a stone's throw away from Heathrow, and I'm in favour of expansion. Are those against Heathrow expansion just narrow-minded and unable to think of the bigger economic picture?
Sadiq Khan.
I've changed my mind on Heathrow, Rani. I was previously in favour of expansion. And let me tell you why I've changed my mind that I'm against expansion of runway 3. Air quality. I mean, if you look at the figures in London last year, almost 10,000 Londoners, 10,000 died in London as a direct consequence of air quality. There are children in some parts of London whose lungs are underdeveloped. But also a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court in London held that our air was unlawful. So, Rani, our air is a killer. It makes children sick, and it's also unlawful. In those circumstances,
you knew this
I
when you
couldn't
were
be in
Transport
favour.
Minister, Transport Secretary, didn't you?
No, the facts have changed. The Supreme Court held 2 months ago that our air was unlawful in breach of the EU Air Quality Directive. Children's lungs have been undeveloped in the last 2-3 years. We've had research from independent bodies. But also, it was last year, Iain, that 9,500 Londoners died as a direct consequence. But also, we've got to accept that there is an argument for an increase in flight capacity in this part of the country. So my solution is one that Howard Davis doesn't rule out, which is no to runway 3 at Heathrow. Let's have a new runway at Gatwick. Far fewer people in Surrey and Sussex, far fewer problems. Have a high-speed link between Gatwick and Heathwick, but also you can have a single check-in in either Heathrow or Gatwick. We can make sure we preserve our hub status.
Isn't the truth that you changed your mind the moment Zach Goldsmith announced he was running?
I mean, look, you've got a choice.
That's what David Lammy thinks.
You can either change your mind when the facts change, or you can be pig-headed and stubborn, have no regrets, as we've just heard. Look, I think the reality is the facts have changed, and I changed my mind when the facts changed, and I don't regret doing so. And I wish that Tessa and David would have the guts to change their mind as well, now that the facts have changed.
All right, well, let's move on to Diane Abbott. What do you think about the expansion of Heathrow?
I have been consistent on this issue, as on many others, and I'm opposed to it. I understand that it creates a lot of jobs in West London, and it's important to protect those jobs. But it is the issue that Sadiq has raised. It's about health, and it's about air pollution. We're above the legal EU limits. There is no way we can get down to legal levels of air pollution with a third runway. 9,000 people, up to 10,000 people die a year from polluted air. Now, I know the Davis Commission says that you can deal with the air pollution by not having night flights and all the rest of it. But the trouble is, once you have a third runway, there'll be all sorts of pressures to override the limitations that Davis is talking about.
Don't forget, you can watch us live at lbc.co.uk in glorious HD. Tessa Jowell, your answer.
Rani, thank you very much for your question. I support on a conditional basis the expansion of Heathrow because the economy of London and the South East needs more airport capacity. However, the conditions are actually, as both Sadiq and Diane have said, legal levels of air quality, and the onus is on the airport operator to ensure that happens not just on one day but on a consistent basis. The second relates to noise, and the third, you say you obviously experience that because you live near Heathrow, and the third is traffic, the risk of creating another congested hub, which in turn, drives more air pollution. So yes to expansion, subject to those conditions.
David Lammy.
My view is that we do need a new noise regulator, and there are issues around pollution. At the moment, Heathrow is not meeting the pollution tests, and it needs to meet them. But like the caller, in the end, £147 billion worth to our economy is not something you should just turn down. Sadiq was on the Politics show 4 weeks before he changed his mind. He was the minister who voted for this and supported this. Zach Goldsmith announced, and suddenly he does a flip-flop. He flip-flopped because he thinks the Tory contender is Zach Goldsmith. In the end, London does need increased air capacity. Davies has looked at it, he's studied it. Let's deal with noise, let's deal with pollution, but please let us not select a candidate that changes his mind every few weeks because it's politically convenient.
It's not me that's calling you a flip-flopper, it's your colleague.
I don't apologise for changing my mind. The facts have changed. I changed my mind. Last year, 9,500 Londoners died as a direct result of air quality. It is a fact that children's lungs in parts of London are underdeveloped. And it is also a fact that on some days, doctors advise Londoners not to jog
there's a track record. You've changed your mind on legal aid. You've changed your mind on airport expansion. What is your mind exactly?
It is also a fact that the Supreme Court held 2 months ago.
Surely it's about trust, isn't it?
Air was unlawful. And look, you got a choice. You can proceed with listening to the lobby at Heathrow. You can proceed to think about how
which you clearly did up to 2009.
Well, the point is, I've changed my mind. I don't apologise at all for changing my mind because the facts have changed.
Okay.
Look, you've got a choice. You can either have a no U-turn, no regrets candidate, or somebody who, when the facts change, will change his mind. And I don't apologise.
We've got that message. The facts change. Sadiq changes his mind. Let's move on to David Lammy's Ask Me Anything. Tessa Jowell, you have the first question.
My question for David is: will you join my campaign, David, to ban sexist adverts on the tube?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're living in a London where sexual assaults are up, where rape is up. I asked the Prime Minister a question, the last Prime Minister's questions about this. I'm very concerned that our refuge centres, their funding are being cut for women, and the support that women get with domestic violence is being cut. But an environment in which it is acceptable to have posters on the tube that objectify women, that challenge, if you like, women's confidence, and frankly have airbrushed images of women that are not actually, anatomically likely or correct is absolutely something that, Tessa, you're right to champion. I saw you in the Standard yesterday. 100% I'm with you.
Just a quick question on that, Tessa. What about the scantily clad men on all of these posters? You don't mention them.
Well, I think that, I think body image is particularly an issue for young women, and it's something, and older women actually, and it's something.
Especially for men too.
No, but I'm sure that's right. It's something that I have campaigned on for 15 years, and was part of getting the double, much more regulation of the model industry. And it's I've had so much rubbish today from men who think it's all a bit of a laugh, but actually it causes distress, undermines the confidence
Diane,
of young women.
What's your question to David?
Well, my question's about tuition fees, to be honest. You talk a lot about equality, I know you mean it, but how do you equate your passion for equality with being part of the ministerial team which introduced tuition fees?
Diane, I have heard you say this, and I chose not to correct you, but because you've raised it today, I think I ought to. You will recall, because you supported me and helped me become a member of Parliament, that I came into Parliament in 2000. I was a young pup in Parliament when tuition fees was
the increases.
I was not a minister.
But what about the tuition fee increases?
There were no tuition fee increases whilst I was the minister. What there was a review about what should happen to tuition fees, and as you know, the Tories came in with the coalition and made their decision. So it's incorrect that. My view is that we had a huge opportunity. We just had a crash to actually we had a tripartite arrangement. We had the state paying, we had the university contributing, and we had the student contributing. What the Tories did was they took the student out of it, they took the state out of it effectively, and they took the university out of it, and the student was paying everything. What we could have done was actually introduced a levy on business, on the banks, and actually we would have reduced it.
Because everyone knows at the time.
I don't know if I'd have got it past Mandelson, but that was my view.
All the talk then was that if Labour had got back, there would have still been tuition fees. But let's go on to Sadiq Khan's question.
David, you and I have been mates for more than 20 years. You've got a more famous mate than me and Barack Obama, famously. Well, what characteristics do you think the rest of us have with your mate Barack Obama?
Another softball question.
Well, I can tell you that... and I know Barack Obama because I went to Harvard and became a friend through the alumni, that just like you, Sadiq, he is from an ordinary, humble background, and to get to where he's got to, he's had to work very, very hard. And we disagree sometimes on policy, but when I look at you, I see someone who's worked damn hard to get to where he's got to. And I know you want to be mayor, and I can feel the force of it. I want to be mayor too, and it's been fantastic to see you really fight your corner over the last 2 weeks.
Let's have a group hug, shall we? I think we'll move on to another question. Derek is in Caledonian Road. Derek, what would you like to ask?
Good evening. Uber could be the final nail in the coffin for London's black taxi industry if it's allowed to continue the way it is. If you're the next mayor of London, who are you going to back to provide London's taxi service? Uber or us, the licensed taxi industry?
Well, it's an either-or question. Let's have a snappy answer. Tessa Jowell.
I would back the London taxi service. I was out all night, Derek, meeting the people who like taxi drivers who keep London working all night. I am enormously concerned about the degree of unregulation in the private hire taxis. I am concerned that women are vulnerable, and I was out on a Friday night and there were a lot of young women getting into taxis. They didn't necessarily know, getting into cars, they didn't necessarily know who they were getting into a car with. While I was with a number of your colleagues, TfL came and did the routine inspection. That is reassuring for the public, and I don't have an Uber account because they don't pay their taxes on profits they earn in this country. Finally, it is not sustainable to go on licensing 1,000 private hire vehicles every month and contain the congestion in London.
Diane Abbott.
You can't uninvent the technology that's made Uber possible, but it does need a lot more regulation. The drivers need a basic level of training. You can't have these thousands of Uber cars coming on the roads every month. So I don't think it's either or. I think there's space for Uber driven by the technology and space for black cabs, but they do need better regulation. I think TfL has been lacking in this regard.
Sadiq?
I think Uber are causing a problem all around the world, Paris, New York and now London. Each year there are 13,000 new private hire vehicles in London. I'm on the side of the black cab driver.
Would you like to effectively run them out of town?
I want better regulation. What I would do is this, Iain. I'd make sure the TfL / the mayor is in charge of regulating these vehicles in London. Just like there's high standards for black cabs, there need to be high standards for private hire vehicles. It's a form of knowledge. The safety checks that take place for black cab drivers, a language proficiency.
Then they become black cab drivers, do they not?
Well, no, they don't, because what we do is we raise the standards. We've got a choice. We can have a race to the bottom of sort of light regulation where any Tom, Dick and Harry can be an Uber cab driver, or proper regulation with with good standards, with proper safety, and making sure that we have safe black cabs, keeping not just the public safe, but tourists too.
And would you apply that to all of the other minicab companies?
I want the rickshaws in London, for example, are a joke. I want TfL to be regulating the rickshaws taking place in London. I think private hire vehicles generally.
You got my vote.
The congestion in London is awful. We talk about air quality with Heathrow. What about air quality with the diesel in London?
David Lammy.
Well, I think Peter Hendy's got a lot to answer for on the way he's treated black cabs and on the licensing that has gone up from 53,000 now to 77,000. So our streets are congested because anyone who wants one can go and get an Uber. They're not paying any tax. There are real issues around safety. There have been some horrible issues around homophobia. Of course, every major city licenses properly those that can run a private hire vehicle. We have failed in the last few years, and I have to say, if I were mayor at the time, I'd have said go to judicial review. I'd have challenged Uber in the same way as the Parisian mayor challenged them in Paris. It's an outrage. Of course, we must protect the institution that is the black cab. I went to a knowledge school a few months ago. It was a fantastic experience. It inspired me to run in this campaign.
You might need it.
It inspired me to announce that we need to bring back night schools in this city of London so that people can skill up and do jobs and get better income. A fantastic institution that needs the mayor's support.
Okay, David, thank you. Let's move on to our next question. It's from Adam in Wembley. Adam, fire away.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to ask the question of how will you stop kids dying on London streets because of knife crime?
Let's go to Diane Abbott.
You have to begin at the beginning. One of the things I've worked on since I've been a Member of Parliament, which is going back 20 odd years and longer, is around education and about trying to keep these kids, mostly boys, in school, raise educational standards. I give awards, I have conferences, because by and large, young men that are doing their A-levels are not out on the streets practicing knife crime. But you also have to have a very firm law and order response to knife crime. I think we need to look at the use of arches that can detect metal when you're going into college and school. But you finally, if you're going to act effectively against knife crime, people have to know they can get caught, and that means people have to trust the police to come forward to the police with their information. One of the things I would do as mayor is build on 30 years of working in the community and try and bring the community and the police closer together. There's been a big improvement from when I started in politics, but there's more to be done. And finally, let me just say to the guy, Adam, let me just say to Adam, which part of the country do you think has the biggest knife crime problem in the UK?
I'm not too sure. I grew up near Brixton, and while I was there in the 90s, it wasn't a fun place.
It was Brixton. Well, you know, actually, which has the biggest knife crime problem in the UK? It's Glasgow. Knife crime is about poverty. Knife crime is about hypermasculinity. Knife crime is about deprivation. And it's important to remember those things.
Tessa.
Adam, thank you for your question. I, as you probably know, was Member of Parliament for Dulwich and West Norwood for 23 years. It covered heart of Brixton. So for the reasons you say, obviously this whole issue of young people getting into gangs, carrying knives, carrying other weapons was a big issue. And, you know, every summer for as many years as I can remember, one young person will have died. I think Diane is absolutely right. You know, building a sense of belonging, purpose and value in school, in activities out of school is a very, probably the most powerful deterrent to young people carrying knives, but also building confidence in the community, in the relationships between young people and the police. I've been doing a lot of work with young people and more latterly with Doreen Lawrence on Stop and Search. One of the big problems is the lack of trust between the police. We're coming up to the end of the hour, so I do need to ask for some quick answers here. David Lammy, now I know this is a subject dear to your heart.
Well, I think of the parents of Godwin Lawson, a 19-year-old killed on the border of my constituency and Diane's. He had a contract at Oxford United, killed for walking down the wrong street for absolutely no reason. I just want to start by saying parenting begins in the home, and that, you know, all of us here are parents, and we should not give the impression that this is all about the state. However, policing and enforcement is important, and we have had police cuts in London, but a lot of people have been locked up. But the third aspect is how you can support parents. Cutting funding to organisations that take knives away from kids and support parents doesn't help. When we see the loss of a kids company, we should be really, really worried. But there are lots of mini kids companies around London. Breakfast clubs, youth services decimated. Okay. All of this stuff matters if we're serious about knives.
Adam, I mentioned that I was raised on a council estate. I go back there often. I was back there today launching the Nicholas Stewart Trust with Jennifer, mum of Nicholas, and planting a tree because 1 year to the day he was stabbed to death in Elsville, which is in my constituency. And I agree with everything David, Diane and Tessa have said. It begins with the family. We need better education. We need more youth services. The government, the mayor and local authorities are cutting youth services. They are crucial. But also, we need to ensure young people have confidence in the police, which is why we need a police service that looks like the London the police seeks to serve. But also, we need to have stop and search used in a sensible, clever way, rather than a situation where if you're a young black Londoner, you're 8 times more likely to be stopped and searched than a white Londoner, or if you're an Asian Londoner, 7 times more likely.
We're going to finish off with a couple of quick-fire texts, so literally one-word answers if we can. Zara in Feltham says, tube fares up or down? She says, and politicians, simple question, no waffle please. Sadiq?
A freeze.
Tessa?
Freeze.
Diane?
Freeze.
David?
Freezing out of London.
How boring. Nick is in Wood Green. He says, Zach Goldsmith says he'll ignore Theresa May and use water cannon anyway. What would you do with them, Diane?
I would send them back to the maker. If Zach Goldsmith is saying this now, that's one reason why he's not going to win next year.
I never thought I'd hear Diane say send them back. David?
I don't think Zach Goldsmith has ever been down Tottenham High Road. You couldn't get water cannon down Tottenham High Road is the problem.
Sadiq?
Sell them for the $250,000 we bought them for, plus storage, and use the money towards youth services.
Tessa?
Sell them and invest in community support for the police.
It's amazing what you can sell on eBay nowadays.
Amazing.
And finally, you'll like this one. This is the and finally question. Amy in Bromley, where would you go on a romantic date in London? David?
I would go to a wonderful little restaurant called Le Mercury. It's near the Almeida Theatre in Islington. I've taken most of my dates there. This is obviously going back before I was married.
Yeah, I did hope so. Okay, so God, nearly Sadiq.
St James's Park. My wife and I spent many days courting there, and I take my family there now as well. It's a great park, and it's one of the joys of London.
Tessa?
I'd get up very early after my romantic date and go to Columbia Road Flower Market, hoping it would be a Sunday morning.
There's so many questions that follow from that. Diane?
Well, so long as it wasn't raining like it is today, I would go for a walk on Primrose Hill, one of the most beautiful views in London.
What a lovely thing to end with. Diane Abbott, thank you. Thanks also to Sadiq Khan, David Lammy and Tessa Jowell for taking part tonight. On our website, lbc.co.uk, none of the candidates have the slightest clue of the questions coming their way, so let's get right into it. Welcome to you all, and without further ado, let's go to Graham in...